being a founding member and engineering lead at Hyperloop India. When Elon Musk started tweeting about the traffic and the Hyperloop in 2017, a few months later, SpaceX decided to conduct a competition. They built a 1 mile long vacuum tube and they said, bring your Hyperloop pods to race within this tube and we'll see who wins. We decided to participate just because we thought we would get a chance to meet Elon. So we built it, we took it all the way to SpaceX. We were able to meet Elon and we were able to participate as one of the 20 finalist teams, right? So while we were there, they took us on a tour of the SpaceX factory. Looking at those rocket engines being built right in front of your eyes, looking at the first ever rocket booster to land back on Earth to be reused that they keep in front of their headquarters. That was like the eureka moment for me that I decided I will work in space technology for the rest of my life. I would say colonization is a bad word that gets a bad rep because of colonization that has happened, but space expansion, humanity's expansion into space is not a question of if, it's a question of when. It will happen. There's no reason, there is no laws of physics that prevent us from building habitats in space. It might take years, it might take a lot of money, but we will get there at some point in time. It's just a natural extension of where humanity needs to be.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Startup Operator podcast. Now, this podcast is extremely special. I know I say that quite often, but this one is truly special because Awais Ahmed, the co-founder of Pixxel, is someone we've tried to have on the podcast for a long time. I've mentioned it enough number of times on roundups and so on, so much so that I was afraid that one of you will just show up at our studio and then ask where the hell he is. But to answer your question, here he is, Awais Ahmed of Pixxel. Hey, welcome to the podcast, Awais. Thank you so much for making time in your busy schedule for us. So wonderful to have you.
Thank you. Good to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, we've covered Pixxel's journey for the last year at least very actively. Your satellite launches, the fundraise, and everything. So very enthusiastic, very keen to kind of understand the space in which you operate, some of the nitty-gritties of the business operations, and so on and so forth. But before we dive into all of that, as a useful primer for some of those folks who may not know what Pixxel does, pretty much everyone does, but let's say some of them who don't have the context yet, could you talk about a bit about your founding story and what Pixxel does?
Sure, no, happy to. We are essentially a space technology company, but more really we are a data company, right? So it's about what data can look at and what data can help make better decisions for us. So we build and deploy a constellation of satellites that go around the Earth. They capture photographs of the Earth. We analyze those photographs to look at farms and say how healthy they are, or look at soil and say how healthy it is, or look at gas pipelines and see if there's anything leaking, or look at forests and see what their health is. So building these satellites, operating these satellites, and bringing this data down, and then analyzing that data to extract insights. We started now in February next year. We will be turning 5 years old.
Oh wow!
It's been a journey, but the story essentially goes, it starts when I was a kid. I was fascinated with space, like most of us are. I don't ever remember not loving space and not being obsessed by it. Different points in time, I've wanted to be an astronaut, an astronomer, and astrophysics as more reality hit in. But that love never left, and I finally had opportunity to do something when I joined college at BITS Pilani in Rajasthan. And the first thing I did was join this student satellite team that was working on satellites who were being helped by the scientists at the Indian Space Research Organization. Learned how to build and design and test a satellite there by the folks who had done it for ISRO multiple times over. And then the second experience in college was being a founding member and engineering lead at Hyperloop India. When Elon Musk started tweeting about the traffic and the Hyperloop in 2017, a few months later, SpaceX decided to conduct a competition. They built a 1 mile long vacuum tube and they said, bring your Hyperloop pods to race within this tube and we'll see who wins. We decided to participate just because we thought we would get a chance to meet Elon. We got selected through the first design stage to our surprise, and then we got serious and we kept getting through different successive stages. And finally, we were selected as one of the 20 finalist teams, and then we actually had to really build it. We were given the green light by SpaceX that your design is good enough to be built, to be raised here. We came down to Bangalore from Pilani because we couldn't do that in the middle of a desert. And we were able to put it together in a span of 3 months. A bunch of 30 undergraduate students with no money and no experience, looking at the engineering, looking at the manufacturing. It was a very fun time, but it was also lots of people threw around the phrase first principles and thinking and doing from first principles. But we had no choice but to do it for a Hyperloop pod because no one had done that before, no one had built it before. There was no how to guide on the internet for it. So we built it, we took it all the way to SpaceX. We were able to meet Elon, and we were able to participate as one of the 20 finalist teams, right? So very, very steep learning curve and very formative experience. But while we were there, they took us on a tour of the SpaceX factory, looking at those rocket engines being built right in front of your eyes, looking at the first ever rocket booster to land back on Earth to be reused, that they keep in front of their headquarters. That was like the eureka moment for me, that I decided I will work in space technology for the rest of my life. It's been my calling, it's been my love, it's been my obsession, and I want to see what I can do. I came back to college and just dived deep into what was happening in space technology, who was doing what, and realized that satellite data was something that was being woefully underutilized in India and surrounding regions. Started working with that, realized that there was a gap. You could make it so much better if you would build a different kind of satellite to provide hyperspectral data. No one else in the world was doing it, so we said, okay, we will build and deploy it ourselves. That's like a brief story for how Pixxel came to be.
Awesome. I think a slight tangent, right? It's amazing that the billionaires of our time, whether it is Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk, are investing in space tech, right, and not just buying another yacht or whatever, right? So fantastic. I mean, I think they're inspiring a whole new generation to build cutting edge stuff, right? So fantastic.
I would say you can buy a yacht and do this.
Of course.
The case of Jeff Bezos.
Hey, there's $100 million of cash, right? I mean, there's plenty to go around for sure, right? What were the early days like, right? Because, I mean, I kind of assume, it's 3 or 4 of you, maybe more, in a garage-like setup, tinkering away, welding, soldering, whatever else you have to do to put stuff together, right?
Yeah.
What do you remember about those days?
Yeah, there were different phases to it. I think as soon as I decided that I wanted to work in space, I started working on it. And over one of the games of a FIFA session, I told my later to be co-founder Kshitij Khandelwal about what I was doing, and asked him if he wanted to sort of join in the work that I was doing. And he was it was lucky that he accepted, and then we got working on it together. And then we immediately went to a few other students that we knew were smart folks and had worked and built something, gotten their hands dirty, either at the Formula student team or some other team. And we sort of like put together this team of, ragtags, and said, okay, we will go down to Bangalore, and like in the case of Hyperloop, we are going to build a satellite in 3 months. Didn't know what was to come, but we said, okay, we will build it. And I would say being naive at an early stage really helps, because once you get started, the momentum keeps you going. We then all came down to Bangalore, and these folks, we didn't have money. Everyone came on their own dime. We were staying at a very shitty paying guest, in one room, 3 of us crammed together in a room that could barely, sustain one. But it was fun. We were just like, oh, we're going to design a satellite, we're going to place an order, we're going to raise sponsorship as a student team, and then do it. And of course, the sponsorships did not materialize. We went to smartphone companies to say, we'll put your smartphone on the satellite, you'll get a money shot of the Earth. No one was willing to bite it. And then over the course of that, I think there was a realization that probably creating a company and then raising investment might seem like a better option than raising sponsorship where they don't get anything in return. And then it was just like mainly the two founders and 2 founding engineers, myself, Kshitij, Tejasvi, and Manas, all from the same batch. And we knew them because they were in the same batch. We decided, we are going to sort of do this, right? And we didn't have money at that point in time. We had just created a company. I decided to reach out to a few of our alumni from college who were in the US. There was a pitching competition in the US. Went there. We were able to pitch, and thankfully some people sort of looked at it as philanthropy, and they were willing to put in some money that they're doing something good from our college. $50,000, $25,000 for them is like pocket change for what they've made. Thankfully, that was enough for us to get started. So it was just the 4 of us initially.
Awesome.
We were shuffling between Bangalore, Chennai, Pilani, depending on where was needed, and still trying to finish our degree. This was still in the final year of college. And doing what we could. I mean, building prototypes, 3D printing stuff, ordering components with the pre-seed money we were able to raise thanks to these angel investors that came in at that point in time. And then we gradually started adding a few more people. I was mentioning Team Indus to you earlier. Team Indus was done a tremendous job increasing the inspiration for space enthusiasts, including me. Sadly, they couldn't see it through because of a lack of funding for sending something to the moon. But then great people that they'd had, a great team that they'd built, had started looking out, and we were able to get a couple of the really good ones early on, and we just kept at it, and eventually it grew. So I would say, it was kind of like, it wasn't really a garage, but it was like essentially the size of this room where 4 of us used to sit, decide, design, and leverage some of our partners to manufacture, because we didn't have the money for our own facility.
Awesome. And just to give context of the times, right? I mean, today we are seeing so much of all of the action in space tech and so on, a bunch of startups operating. 2018, 2019, there was no private space industry in India. It was before the whole Indian Space Organization Association was formed.
Correct.
Right? And so on. What were those times like from an execution perspective? Because I feel like you're building for a market you don't truly understand, that doesn't really exist, right? And how has the Indian Space Association, the support from the government, and some of the larger organizations, whether it's Airtel, L&T, all these folks who are part of the association, right? How has that kind of spurred the action that we're seeing right now?
Yeah, I would say we have seen different phases. When we started in 2019, there were a few startups that had begun before us. There was both Skyroot and Agnikul who were in the early stages of their design doing rockets. I think an year in when we started. Dhruva Space had been there since 2013 and they had sort of gone dormant and then they came back up in 2019, 2020. So, like, amazing story of grit and tenacity there. There was a company by Narayan Prasad called Sat Search that he was running out of Netherlands again. So there were few inklings of some people trying to do something, but there was no framework, there was no policy, there was no guarantee that any of these companies,
Yeah,
including us,
anything will
would get
materialize. Yeah.
any license or certification to do something or launch something to space. But then it all changed suddenly because we different people kept talking to the government to open it up and open it up and open it up. We can't fall behind other countries when you look at China, when you look at the US, when you look at Europe. And then, as a slew of economic measures that were announced to combat COVID slowdown for the economy, the finance minister also announced space was going to be opened up. No one saw it coming. It was like a complete out of the blue thing, but it was a great thing because this came directly from the prime minister's office. Because the prime minister is also the minister for space. You will see no minister for space separately.
Oh, right.
And so the prime minister is the minister for space, and since it came from the top, and then things fall in place, and people have to show success stories. This was way long before the Russia-Ukraine thing. So we were at that point in time when Russia was still in good terms with a lot of the countries. We were planning on launching through the Soyuz rocket. And then when this happened, Department of Space reached out to us saying, hey, could what about launching from India? And we're like, of course, we were happy to do that. We had evaluated before, but it didn't work out due to a variety of reasons because there was no framework. But it has always been a dream to sort of obviously build a satellite in India, launch it from an Indian rocket. And then we moved it to the ISRO launch. So I think now things are very different. There's support from all branches of the government. There is in space that has been set up, which is the regulatory authority now under the Department of Space, separate from ISRO, to make sure that there's no bias, because ISRO is also an operator in some things, building rockets, building satellites, and great folks, great leadership. But it was still good to, from a formal standpoint, have a separate legal entity called InSpace that could help formalize and authorize any of the activities going on in the private space sector. And they've been nothing but helpful and been the single window of clearance for everything, single point of contact for anything. They connect us then to the relevant departments in the Indian government. If associations like ISPA, ISPA, or others are helpful in the sense that they bring together startups and large companies, and you can discuss about problems and put together a united front to InSpace or to ISRO, to the Department of Space or the Prime Minister's office, and that gets taken care of. So I would say, yeah, like it's a very vibrant ecosystem. It's still small enough that every one of us knows each other and what we are doing.
Right.
Very few success stories though, so it's still very, very early innings, so as to say. Long way to go, but I mean, with the expertise and experience that ISRO has already, we're not starting from scratch. We can build on top of one of the top 3 agencies in the world in terms of space and what they've been able to do. So very bullish, but still early stages. I mean, we can't take it lying down. We need to work for it.
I think ISRO has been phenomenal, right? I mean, if you look at, I was listening to this audio series called Mission ISRO, which is narrated by Harsha Bhogale.
Yeah.
Fantastic, right? Talks about the early days with Vikram Sarabhai and, and so on, how they kind of set this up, Abdul Kalam, Satish Dhawan, and the others, right? And I mean, even with these recent launches and some stuff, right? I mean, Chandrayaan 3, Aditya L1, they've captured the imagination of the country, right? But they, at the same time, you often have this guns and butter argument, right? I mean, where, for a nation that is, at per capita income of like $2,000 or whatever, what is the need for us to invest in space and so on, right?
Yeah.
How would you kind of, reply to that sort of a mindset and that argument?
See, it's not an either or, right?
Yeah.
You can't, For example, if you are budgeting for home, you're going to have an entertainment budget. You're not going to be like, oh, why don't we have an additional coffee or an additional tea or an additional food or additional rice, right? Which is still important. And if you only basically have enough for that, you do that, right? Absolutely don't have to do it. But for a country as aspirational as India, there's tangible and intangible benefits that come from it. It makes a nation dream. It makes a nation inspired and motivated to do things that they otherwise would not think possible. People staying up until 2 a.m. in the night when Chandrayaan 1 was trying to land, and I remember, what a sorrowful night. But the fact that an entire nation stayed up so late to be able to look at it, and the nation looked at it together now, just gives inspiration to so many kids that they could grow up and do something. And that is an intangible benefit that you can't really put a number to. But then when you look back 3 decades later and India wants to, be one of the superpowers, and it will be with the demographic that's there, this is how you do it, right? And then when you look at space technology, spending billions and hundreds of billions of dollars on it, GPS that every one of us uses, without which you would not have Amazon, without which you would not have any of the e-commerce websites, without which you wouldn't have, just the ease of traveling from one place to the other. GPS wouldn't be there if space technology wasn't really invested in, right? One of the many examples in terms of what has been achieved when technology happened. In the 1960s, 1970s, NASA bought 90% of all the computer chips that were made. So the computer chip ecosystem really only came up because of that anchor customer at that point in time, and now we have access to the internet, and it has grown, which might have gotten delayed if that was not the case, right? And in terms of, again, in our country, it not only provides a level of prestige to the country for it to be able to negotiate better terms for different deals with different countries, it just inspires and motivates people. So I would say it's not a matter of if or we definitely have to still look at the benefits of the population and other things, but we can't say, oh, we are going to wait until that point in time for us to be able to do that, because by the time we pick that up, it'll be too late.
Yeah, absolutely. Space tech often percolates down to any kind of, maybe consumer applications, right? I mean, I'm sure that you will find something in a microwave or refrigerator that originally had some kind of a, was part of some kind of a space tech research or something of that sort. And also,
or if you look at weather predictions, right, being able to say that there might be a tornado coming, there might be a hurricane coming. How do you do that? You do that by weather satellites up there. They're telling you what the weather patterns will be, and to be able to do that, which saves lives, which actually saves lives, and it's creating tangible impact there, apart from the intangible impact itself.
No, and I feel like in the next 5 to 10 years, I feel like we are poised to really open up this commercial space industry, India especially, right? Because, I mean, look at Chandrayaan, 600 crores. Right? I mean, we have some of the cheapest and most efficient facilities and resources here. So I mean, it might very materially pay off with very tangible benefits in the next 5-10 years, right?
Absolutely. I think, look, ISRO has done a tremendous job over the last 6 decades, 7 decades that they have been operating. And with the amount of budget that they get, it's a small percentage of what China spends and what US spends. And still being able to do what they do with that is basically punching beyond your weight, pinching above and beyond your weight. And that has set a foundation for all of us essentially to come in and build on top of that. You can't have just one space agency doing everything for the country. Now that that's done, ISRO as a space research organization can get back to its roots and focus on cutting edge research that could bring in even more benefits for humanity. Whereas the commercial sector can then focus on taking that and commercializing it and getting it to the masses and people. Examples such as us, who can provide images that can make farms more efficient, that can help reduce pollution and things like that, would not have been possible if we didn't have the skill set from folks that were building satellites at ISRO before, who have now come on board and working with us as well. So absolutely, I think the next 10 years will put India on the private global space map as well, just like ISRO has put us on the public global space map.
Yeah, and for those of you who are curious about this whole budget and stuff like that, right? I mean, just check out this film called Rocketry that recently came out that profiles Nambi Narayanan, right?
Or the TV show Rocket Boys, which shows the
Rocket Boys,
the setting
also,
up of ISRO and Bharat.
Fantastic, amazing ingenuity and perseverance, right? Discovering use cases, right, when a market doesn't exist. I mean, that kind of boggles my mind, because I operate in SaaS, which is like extremely mature, the largest market right now in terms of software and whatnot, right? And we still struggle to find use cases, but I can't even conceive of, thinking of potential use cases when a market doesn't exist. How did you arrive at hyperspectral imaging? How did you sort of evangelize this with your potential customers? and so on. Can you talk us through the thinking behind that?
It's like Schrodinger's market. Okay, the market exists, but it doesn't exist. Like in the sense that the customers are there. You're not creating new customers, but they don't know where to spend it essentially, and you have to prove it out, right? So the market is there, but it is not there.
Right.
It's Schrodinger's market. What we did essentially when we started is, the when I was just reading about everything that was happening in space technology and imaging and what could be done, I came across hyperspectral imagery that was proven as a concept by NASA. Specifically, JPL was the one that invented hyperspectral imaging, and then there was data that was there at very limited quantities from an old satellite. And there was research around how much more this data could help us see that existing satellite data couldn't, which is why our tagline, Seeing the Unseen, is that hyperspectral data will help you identify between different crop species. It will help you identify what nutrients are present in the soil or not. It will help you identify species of trees. It will help you identify which gas is leaking where, which today's data won't be able to do at that level of detail, right? So it's going beyond human vision, seeing the unseen. So there was that scientific basis that was the start that, okay, this doesn't exist, this probably could be something better. And then what I did was I just looked at all the potential customers I could find that were buying existing satellite data, send them a quick email or an in-mail on LinkedIn, cold email or in-mail, to ask them if this is something that makes sense to them, if they would be willing to pay for it, what are they currently paying, what would they be willing to pay for it. And to my surprise, more than 90% of them responded, even though they were like CEOs or some VPs of these large companies, who said that they have been evaluating hyperspectral as the next step for what they could do. That even if they hadn't done that, this is something that looks very promising, that they'd be willing to pay a premium if we could actually do what we were promising to do. So we knew initially there was some market here, that if we build, there are going to be some customers who see the value in it. In the end, you need to either help save them money or help stave off their losses or make them more efficient, right? As long as you can do that, whether it's an agri company, oil and gas company, or a government, there is a market and they will pay for it, even though that market for that product might not exist. And then we just started working on the technology, and in parallel, we tried to have deeper and deeper conversations with as many customers that would engage with us at that point. And the more we could show that we had built technology and launched satellite, the more customers willing to engage with us, and that became a very positive feedback loop. We were actually taking in input to work on our satellites and cameras and what they need to provide. And that input then went to some people who were like, yeah, this is good enough, this is not, this is over-engineered or under-engineered. So that's what we particularly did, right? And there are some cases in which the market has to be created completely new, in which case the government becomes the first buyer in most cases. The US government is a big buyer for lots of satellite data that might not have found a commercial niche yet, which is something we need to still get there with India, but it's early stages, and we will sure get there where the government becomes the anchor customers. Or when you look at GPS, now there are a few GPS companies coming up trying to make it more accurate. But
we have our own, right? Navic.
We have our own, but that was built and deployed by the government, right? Not commercial.
Right.
Similarly, in the US, it was built and launched, I think, by the US Air Force, and then open sourced after a few years for everyone, right? So that would not have happened if that investment sort of didn't come in earlier. So in some cases, it has to be the government that is the market. So the trick is then to either have hundreds of millions of dollars of your own money as billionaires to take you through to the point where you can create that market. But in most cases, the market exists in a format. You just have to convert them into something much better that can help save them money or that can help make it more efficient for them. That existed, just that not in the format we have. Hopefully that makes sense.
Right. I think you bring up a fantastic point, right? Which is when you talk to deep tech startups and so on, the number one cause for mortality is that they never talk to customers. Right? I mean, they're all product guys, bunch of engineering geeks, whatever, and they're hacking away in their, garage. And then, lo and behold, they bring a product which is not completely overlapped with what the industry or the customer wants. But you're talking about building with the customer, right? So can you, maybe like deep dive a little more on that in terms of how did the thinking come about, and if you could prescribe one or two things that have kind of worked for you and what others should do?
Yeah, just talk to your customers and listen to them, but don't listen and agree to everything that they say. There's especially in our case, it's kind of like a combination of, yes, listen to your customers as to what they want, read research papers as to what's actually possible and what is needed, because sometimes the customers might be asking for a little too much, and they always ask for too much, but do your own research on whether what they're asking makes sense or not. And sometimes the customers don't know what they want, right? When you look at iPhone, people didn't know they wanted touchscreen phones, and you have to sometimes force it down the throat of your customers as well.
I think we should cue Steve Ballmer talking about the iPhone at this point, right? Yeah.
So I would say it's a combination of looking at all of those things, at least in our case, where you definitely talk to customers, you note down everything that they're saying, but make sure you filter that.
Yeah.
You don't have to unnecessarily unfiltered take it all the way. For all of it you think makes sense, by all means take it and implement it. But then you then look at what is physically possible in our case, and then you look at what might be good enough versus what is a luxury versus what is a need. That's what we did. So I think, yeah, I mean, the answer to that is straightforward. Reach out to your customers, talk to as many of them, take feedback, but have a filter to make sure you're not taking all the feedback that you get that might be useful, not useful.
So you have a horizontal solution, right? By that I mean that it can be used by multiple industries. How are you structured at this point of time to sort of have a educated conversation with, let's say, someone in agri, let's say someone in oil and gas, let's say someone in potentially finance for lending or whatever it is, right? So how have you structured that?
I mean, so I think, look, we tend to hire people that can pick up things fast, because by the virtue of what we are doing, we are working on cutting edge satellites that no one has built before at the level of quality that we are building. Like, we are 6 times better in resolution than the best NASA hyperspectral satellite, or the best ISRO hyperspectral satellite, while being a magnitude or 2 lower in cost and weight. Which means we have to be pushing the bounds of what could be done from a technology standpoint, which means no one has really done that before. Yes, you can get someone from a space background and satellite building background, but you have to unlearn some things to say, is this actually possible and not? The only rules are the laws of physics. If the laws of physics say it's possible, otherwise it's not. That's sort of how you have to sort of think about it. So yeah, I mean, I would say I forgot the question completely.
Right. No, I mean, actually you answered that to a degree. So my question was, you are serving multiple industries, right? So
yeah. So I think, I mean, we have to have people that can learn and pick up things, essentially, whether that's technology or sales.
Right.
Hire people that can learn the technology and can easily talk to customers about it. You don't need to understand the nitty-gritties of it,
Right.
but we are still such a young company that everyone needs to understand what everyone is doing to a certain level of degree.
Right.
But the underlying product is the same, right? So the data is hyperspectral data.
Right.
It's used in different industries in a slightly different format depending on what bands you use.
Right.
But the product is the same. You're looking at something, we're going to tell you if something is that was otherwise invisible, we can see or not.
Right.
So all you need to understand the pain point of the customer. It's again something every startup and every company needs to do. Understand the pain point of your customer in that industry, and then try to marry your technology with that thing. So when we go to talk to a large agri company or a cooperative society or a government, we are talking about how you're not able to identify crops being infested with diseases or pests before symptoms start to show up. And we can see that from our satellites. So if you can look at it a few weeks earlier than you can otherwise see it, you're going to help save quite a few percentage of your crops. Or if you're looking at a gas pipeline and leaks lead to a lot of regulatory fines for these companies, we can help plug those leaks immediately the day after the leak is there, which you are not able to see otherwise, right? So going to them and saying, this is your pain point, this only our solution can help you solve that. That's what we need to learn from a sales standpoint and marry that, and the technology can get built there. So I would say building that integrated team that can learn from each other and sort of look at it as a holistic whole. I mean, there's no easy answer. You just have to work hard at it.
Right. I assume that you've built a bunch of proprietary software around this, right? I mean, because hey, you need to analyze that data also, right? I mean, it's not like you can give that raw form of data to the customers and ask them to make sense of it.
Yeah.
So are you also thinking of, maybe spinning that software off as something that other such companies like yours can use it?
Yeah, we have, I always say we have 2 startups under one roof. One is a startup that is designing, building, operating satellites, bringing down data. And the other one that is building the software solution to make this data easily accessible, and the models, AI, deep learning, or mathematical statistical models that can extract insights from this data. So we already have a platform called the Aurora platform that we decided to focus on since quite a few early days, that we need to build this. All traditional startup advice said no to that. Focus on just one thing. Why do you want to do 2 things? But we also understood we are not just a traditional startup. Like in space, you can't really use the principles you would apply for a SaaS company or for any other company.
You're early in the space, right? I mean, quote unquote. So, I mean, you might as well build all of the technology that others coming after you could use it as well.
Correct.
Right?
Exactly. So the platform, you don't need to have a background in remote sensing or GIS or any of the degree. If you know how to work a browser, come in, like you would go on Google Earth, type in the place, it takes you there, you
Awesome.
draw a box, it'll show you imagery and dates, you can select it, download it. And if you don't want to even look at the data, you can say, show me the nutrient map, it'll generate that for you. Tell me, show me where the trees are, it'll generate for that for you, right? So that became a necessity because except a few early sophisticated customers, most people didn't know how to work with satellite data. So it became a necessity to provide a platform that made it easy for everyone to come in and use it.
In terms of your plans for the satellite itself, right? I mean, you want to have a constellation that's about 36 satellites up in the space. You're about, 10th of the way through, I suppose 12th of the way through. You have 3 up there, and you have another 4 or 5 that are scheduled for launch. What is the planning behind this? How do you kind of, like, take us through what is the mindset, what is the planning that goes into this? When do we see satellite number 36 up in the
I think the number has come down now. We started with 36, but we've been able to optimize a whole lot by increasing the field of view of our sensor, which means we can cover more area with one satellite, and by playing around with orbital physics that make sure that you can use the orbital mechanics essentially to get the revisit you want, right? So essentially, depending on the orbit we put our satellites in, the satellite is consistently orbiting around the Earth. If I'm imaging Bangalore at 10 a.m. today, it's going to image Los Angeles at 10 a.m. as well. It's going to be 10 a.m. everywhere, which means that as the sun is moving with respect to the Earth, the satellite is also moving. So we cover the entire globe with one satellite.
Okay.
So global coverage is done, but we revisit a place after quite a few days or a week or 15
So you want to
days.
bring that time down.
So to bring that time down, to revisit it every day, we need more satellites. So with 3 satellites up in space right now, we can do anywhere between 5 to 15 days depending on where you are looking at, which is great to start with. We can bring down data, we are providing it to customers, but nowhere near enough the rate at which we need to do it, which is daily. 6 satellites that are currently being tested as we speak are booked for launch in first half of next year. They will go up there and they will be able to provide daily revisit any place on the planet. If I'm looking at Bangalore today, I will be able to relocate it within 24 hours, and that holds true for any point on the globe. So that 6 then becomes important for us to be able to service customers on a daily basis. And then to add additional capacity, we will launch them in batches of 3 or 6 to add more capacity. So the 36 has now come down to more like 18 or 24 that we would need to. I think with 24, we should be able to cover the entire landmass and coastal areas of the planet on a daily basis.
Awesome.
Beyond which point the addition is marginal. So yes, we plan on launching other kinds of satellites that will come after that. So it will definitely get to 36. But as of now, the plan is 6 satellites next year and then 12 more to 18 more the year after that, which completes it by the end of 2025. Then we move on to other kinds.
Right. Before we started recording, you spoke about this sense of passionate urgency that you need to build in a team, right? I mean, that let's do things as quickly as possible, right? But also, I mean, you operate in a place where, you can't really fail fast, right? You can't ship something and if it breaks, I mean, one patch will fix it. You can't do that,
Correct.
right? How do you sort of balance between both of these?
Yeah, I would say that's a very hard problem that we're currently going through. Like I recently read the new Elon Musk biography, right? And we were able to relate a lot of things that, hey, we have been doing this as well. But I mean, the sense of urgency he brought in the early stages of SpaceX was possible because there was $100 million to start with, right? Let's be real. You can afford to blow up an engine or two and then still be fine with it. Now they're able to raise $500 million every quarter or so they can afford to blow up a Starship or 2 and still be fine. We are not at that stage, right? We have a little bit of a buffer to be able to fail a little bit and experiment some things, but it then becomes a very fine balance between making sure that, okay, look, we are dealing with very expensive hardware. The way we do it, at least in our industry generally, and that's not unique to Pixxel, but generally the industry is you have an engineering model, you have a qualification model, and you have a flight model. The engineering model is for you to be able to just test electronically what you can do and things like that, and if some of it blows up while you're testing it, it's fine, it's never going to fly. Qualification model is to qualify all of this for different levels of testing. You put that in a thermo vacuum chamber and see how it performs, high temperature, low temperature, take it through shaking that it will see in the rocket and make sure that it doesn't fall apart. So you're doing a bunch of testing and failing on things that won't fly, so you can afford to, and these will be a little cheaper, so you account for that. And then finally, flight models. They undergo the basic minimum level of testing before you send it up there, so you're already done with a bunch of stuff before you do the flight model. So we make sure that way that the most expensive components, which are the flight models that are the models that will fly, are not the ones going through the brunt of it. And the urgency then essentially is, sometimes we tend to get a little too comfortable. It's like in any other startup, like, oh, we need to discuss this and take a decision, or we're going to schedule a call when everyone's available next Monday, next Tuesday. Like, why not today, right? Why you're in the office? Why not just bring people together, discuss it in 15 minutes and get to a decision? If you're not aligned, then bring in some other folks and sort of get there. Or a vendor comes back to you and says, oh, this piece will get done in 6 weeks, and they promise 6 weeks, so they'll say now it'll be 8 weeks. Take a cab, take a bike, get to their place and just talk to them and understand why is it going to take 6 instead of 3 in the first place. Can that be 2? Can that be 1? And are they taking any assumptions that you can just dispel, making it easier? Or have you taken the requirement that is making not sense for you, right? So I would say just constantly thinking about that on a daily basis, making sure you're following up with the people that are owning it. And it's a delicate balance also between micromanaging and at the same time letting people take their call. So having constant update of that's a delicate balance you have to strike. Hopefully once we have a little bit more money, we can afford to fail a little bit more, blow up a few things, still be fine. Similar to how Starlink or SpaceX is able to do, which they've kind of perfected, and it makes sense, but not at this point. So that balance exists. So be careful, but while being careful, move as much as possible. One of our cultural values actually is make haste slowly, which is a little bit of an oxymoron, but it's like move as fast as you can, but not at the compromise of blowing something up or making something not work or breaking something.
I think it's like paraphrasing I don't know if it was Einstein or whatever who said make things as simple as possible but more simpler.
Yeah, that's also another one of the cultural principles. Keep it simple. Keep it simple, stupid. Or actually that was the exact quote that we use in our culture deck, which is make something as simple as possible but not more.
Simpler. Yeah. You brought up another very complicated facet of your business operations, which is the supply chain thing, right? Which is, hey, I mean, if I have to set up a satellite, I probably am sourcing things from 30 different vendors, right? And all of these have to come in at this, at a certain quality. They have to come in that particular time stipulated. How do you bring all of this together? And I think the ecosystem here is still sort of nascent, right? I mean, it is still developing, I would say. So anything that you have realized from working on this for the last 4-5 years?
Yeah, you just have to be on top of these folks and sometimes be ready to crack the whip on them, so as to say. Some vendors are really professional. You place an order, you give them requirements, they come back with exactly what you want. But in some cases, it's not either top of priority for them or they're willing to take shortcuts to provide it to you. So the way we do it is we try to inculcate in every member of the team that you are responsible not only for the designing of something, you're responsible for seeing it through until it works in space. Your job doesn't stop at designing. If you haven't thought about how the manufacturing will be, if you haven't thought about how the qualification of that will be, if you haven't thought about how it will integrate with the rest of the system, your job's not done. You don't have separate design team and integration team as such. You have to make sure you see it through to the end until it works in space, and before that your job's not done. That makes sure that then those folks are invested in taking care. So the respective subsystems that are working on avionics, for example, or the camera, for example, or the power system, for example, are then empowered and own the fact that they need to interface with their vendors. They need to be on top of them. And of course, you have regular checks and balances from a systems engineering standpoint, from a program standpoint, where things that might have gotten missed from a system level or the big risks are sort of talked about. And sometimes people, our vendors say, oh, it'll get done in 6 weeks, it'll get done in 8 weeks. And then you talk to them 6 weeks later and then, oh, it's still 6 weeks away. Sometimes we just need to be able to take a flight to them. And our supply chain is in Europe, is in South Africa, as in Canada, as in US. So it becomes harder at points in time, but you just be on top of them as much as possible. Don't take them at their word. Be nice to them, but ask them questions and verify. Trust, but verify. Yeah. I think that's sort of what we do generally here. Yeah.
Only the paranoid survive.
That's true.
So,
only the diligent survive. Paranoid is a little bit of a scary word, but only the very diligent survive.
Yeah, for sure. Don't assume anything and just be on top of things, right? Easier said than done.
Correct.
Hey folks, Roshan here from the Startup Operator. If you have a product or service that is relevant to startups and you're targeting founders, operators, or investors in the Indian startup ecosystem, the Startup Operator platform is the best place for you to deploy your advertising or branding budget. So drop us a line on the email mentioned below or DM us on social media to learn about sponsorship opportunities like ad insertions or branded content and so on and so forth. I'll look forward to hearing from you. we've spoken about the market, we've spoken about the business. Let's talk about you. What is your daily schedule like? From engineer to now co-founder CEO, right? You've adopted a lot of responsibility. What are your top 3 priorities? What do you do when you wake up?
It changes depending on every day, and there's no one set schedule, honestly. As I was mentioning to you earlier, we now have an office in the US as well, where I spend a decent amount of time every year making sure we are hiring the team there, making sure we are selling into that market. It's a very large market. The last 3 weeks was actually a mad train hopping trip around Europe, talking to the largest customers we could find and meeting them face to face, because face to face meetings move deals along much faster than any virtual meeting would ever be able to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So the good thing about my role is that the good and bad thing about it is it comes with a lot of variety. Right. My focus, I would say, is one, set the vision for the company, making sure everyone's on the same page and they're all motivated and aligned towards the larger vision that we are trying to achieve. And that is then tied down to their roles and responsibilities and what they are doing. Hire the relevant leaders that are really good at their job, and then providing them with the resources and the information, and removing the frictions from their way to be able to do it. I used to do sales at some point in time, but then now we have a really good sales team that can go out and talk to anyone, and I just need to step in wherever required, or I don't even need to step in some cases, and it just sort of gets done. Right. So that becomes the role. Find the greatest team that you could find, and then have them with the resources and back them to do the best work possible. But then you also have to be a little bit more diligent in following up where there are fires. Right. So at some points, my priorities might be fundraise, might be the biggest priority. Right. For a period of 2 or 3 months, it's top of mind constantly about getting enough money in the bank so that then the team can execute and we are not worried about money, and then we can get to a point where we can generate revenue. Right. As I was mentioning to you earlier, I love the technology and engineering aspect of it. So I can't really stay away from it. So I focus on certain engineering and technological aspects, making sure the timeline, we are on top of the timelines wherever I see that there are the most risks, for example. Or sometimes it seems a little irritating to people, I know, but if you don't do that, then things tend to get missed, right? So you have to have that balance. Sometimes it's doing customer trips. If you feel that getting customer contracts will be the most important thing that will take us ahead, sort of doing that. And then the things that you don't anticipate will come up. Lots of people issues, ego issues, and things like that, right? And all are good people, but you need to manage people. That's not something I'm really good at. I'm like it might not seem like it, but I'm a big introvert, right? I don't really. I would prefer to not.
I have this theory that every founder, most founders are introverts until they
correct
have to, right? Until they have to step in. I think.
And it's not like I don't like talking to people. I absolutely do. It's just that if you ask me if I wanted to go out and talk to people on the weekend versus be at home and read a
Chill
book.
at home. Yeah.
It's always pick up a book and be at home and meet no one. So those are, I think that's what my day looks like. Most days it's wake up after late night calls with the US. Like it doesn't matter if I'm in the US or in India, right? If when the night time starts, it's day elsewhere, and so there's always meetings. And then you wake up sort of early in the morning, you shower and you rush to the office because then your meetings start depending on wherever you are. But it's fun. It's like the way I see it, at least, is I like chess as a game, and it's like this Pixxel is like a large game of live 4D chess. You have so many things going on. You need to be considering, what your customers are going to think, your investors are going to think, what the technology is, and tie it all together, which is a very fun problem to have. Yeah.
Right. You brought up fundraising, right? And you must have seen attitudes differ vastly, right, in the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
From when you initially went to these folks with a concept and to now when, it's such a hot space, right? Literally, like everyone wants a space tech play, so to speak, right? Do you have any advice for founders who are pitching, a deep tech idea to investors, what to do, what not to do?
Yeah, space is really cold, to be honest, but it is a hot space on ground. But in terms of fundraising, things have differed, right? When we started, we were still students. Everyone is willing to take a meeting with us because it's interesting that a bunch of young students are building satellites. Let's talk to them and see what they're up to.
Yeah.
But when it comes to putting in money, that's where things differ vastly. Thankfully, we had a few early backers, and one fund, GrowX Ventures, that put money in the pre-seed on the basis of the fact that these young students could, a very small percentage, end up doing something. I remember in the pre-seed stage when we were funding GrowX, it's a very interesting story, right? So we had a little bit of a commitment from a few angel investors that we were about to close the round. And it was during the final examinations in Pilani, and Delhi is about 4 hours away. So just before the exams, one day before the exam, I was speaking at a space policy dialogue, and an investor had reached out. So before the talk, we had a breakfast, talked to him, explained to him what we were doing. Then I went and did my talk, then went back to Pilani, wrote exams for the next 2 days. I thought this was not happen. And then I get a call. I was like, oh, I have one free day tomorrow before another exam starts. I get a call in the evening, hey, can you come tomorrow and talk to the larger team? And we decided, we like, oh cool, we can come, and then left the next day. The meeting happened, it was Saturday evening in Delhi, and we just pitched them. And one of the things in the pitch deck, apart from the normal stuff, we were building satellites, they're smaller, they're cheaper, they can see more things, is we had a plan till 2050. We were like, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to do this, we're going to build a massive company. And most of it might come true, might not come true, but we really had a large vision, and we were in it for the long term, which they saw. And awesome. They said, why don't we put in money? And we were like, yeah, it works well. And then we went back in the night, and then next morning was an exam again, right? So very I think it was that sort of how that sort of came to be in the early stages. But I would say the tips for reaching out to investors would be, look, by the virtue of the definition of what you're doing, hard tech, it'll be hard to find investors that are willing to take that risk. Mm-hmm. People are not willing to take risks in risky SaaS ventures. I mean, taking risk in hardware and deep tech things is going to be hard. The job is to find those investors that believe in you. Mm-hmm. If you knock on 1,000 doors, one door will open and will call you in. That's what we did. Yeah. We talked to as many investors as we could. Most of them said no, that's fine, don't get dejected, just keep on moving to the next. And if you're in Bangalore, you get rejected by Ola and Uber every day, it's get easier a little bit, right? Yeah. That prepares you for the world. So investor rejections don't really hurt that much. But yeah, just keep at it and plan for it, I would say. Make sure that you have all the data and you have thought of do your homework. You can't shortcut your way into it. You need to know what you're building, why you're building, customers there, and then see it through. Have a very tight, rigorous 2-3 month process. Worst case, make sure that you are either getting a yes or a no from any of the ones you talk to in a few weeks. Don't let them string you along. That's one of the mistakes we did. We kept talking to this early fund for 3 months, 6 months. They kept asking for more and more things. They were using our information and our knowledge to build up their theses and never end up investing in it. At some point, we were like, this is not going to happen.
This is a classic,
Yeah. So make sure that you don't fall into those pitfalls, but you run a very tight process. You have a good narrative and a story, but back it up with research and data.
Right. Slight tangent, right? Your payment cycles must be like really long, right? From when you close an order to actually when you receive the cash. I think that might cause some complications in terms of cash flow and stuff, right?
Our sales cycle is long. Payment cycle is not really long. Okay. It's a great business to be in once you have spent the money to send the satellites up there. Okay. Right? You're spending lots of millions of dollars or hundreds of crores of rupees sending these satellites up there. Right. But once you send them up there, then it's a very high margin business. Your cost of goods sold and your operating cost will be much, much lesser than the revenue you're able to generate. Like, margins could go as high as 80-90% at some points in time. Right. So I would say, and the payments happen before the images are delivered.
They pay upfront.
Or in large multi-year contracts, they get paid out every month. We deliver that month, they pay at the end of that month, in some cases at the beginning of the month. Right. So payment cycles are not long, except with government, which is a problem anywhere. They will take their time to pay you. You just need to make sure your cash flows are accounted for. But the sales cycle is long. In some cases, the earliest is probably 3 months usually in most cases, and for government it would go up to 18 months. So you have to start early, but once you close it, then it's a good business to be in. Large margins, fairly decent payment cycles.
Right. So an IPO is in the works somewhere?
Not anytime soon. I think if you look at the SPAC craziness that happened, lots of space companies went public way too early, and they have been squeezed dry. It's okay if you have enough cash to see you through the next 3-5 years. An example of that is Rocket Lab, amazing company. They have done great acquisitions. The stock price is not where it should be, I would say, for the potential that they have, and it's come down, but it doesn't matter because they have the cash to see it through the next 3-5 years, and as long as they come out great on the other side, it's okay. They're not in it to make a 100x multiple in the first 2 years after going public. But a lot of other companies went to public before they even had revenue, any sense of cash flow positivity, or even EBITDA positivity. And that means that they will run out of money, and their stock price goes so down that they have no option but to go into bankruptcy proceedings or get bought out. So we don't want to get into that position. We want to make sure our financials are really strong before we do that. So no, not thinking of it now.
Retail investors, are not that patient, right? I mean, you look quarter to quarter, basically.
Correct.
It's very difficult, I suppose. Right?
Exactly.
Final couple of questions, right? And I have to ask you this as someone involved in space tech. Is space colonization a possibility? And if so, when?
I would say colonization is a bad word that gets a bad rep because of colonization
of
that
course.
has happened. But space expansion, humanity's expansion
Yeah.
into space is not a question of if, it's a question of when. It will happen. Why do humans climb mountains? Because it is there to be climbed, right? And we've always been voyagers. We started from one continent, we expanded towards the planet. There's no reason, there is no laws of physics that prevent us from building habitats in space. It might take years, it might take a lot of money, but we will get there at some point in time. It's just a natural extension of where humanity needs to be. We are the only life as we know it. We are universe's only way of studying the universe, and the universe, I think, wants us to study more of the universe and go beyond solar system and do that. So it will happen for sure. And we want to help do that, because one of the long-term visions of Pixxel is use hyperspectral satellites to scout the asteroids and see which ones actually have material for building things in space. Because if we're building huge habitats in space, the material has to come from somewhere. It's not going to come from Earth. We don't want to pollute it anymore. So that's one place where we think we can help. I think Elon is great at wanting to make humanity multiplanetary by settling on other planets. But most of the universe is not planets. We actually need to be building our own biomes in space. And that can happen only if you're able to extract material at scale. So I would say it's definitely going to happen. Very excited to see it. Hopefully it happens in my lifetime and we'll work towards that, but it will require multiple countries to come together, or a particular country to take a lead. So it could take a few decades or a century or two, but it'll happen.
Awesome. Another tangent, what is Elon like in person? I know, you met him.
I met him very briefly during the Hyperloop time.
Right.
As I said, the reason to participate was that we thought we could get a chance to meet him. We did, thankfully. We took our pod all the way there. He came to see it, talk to us. I got to shake hands with him. He was surrounded by bodyguards and a couple of his kids. So I was able to explain a few things to him, but he doesn't remember me, of course, because he met 20 other teams there, and busy guy. He seemed fairly smart, intuitive at that point in time. Of course, I respect what he has done with SpaceX and Tesla and other things immensely. As to his Twitter antics, I plead the fifth.
All right. Before we end the podcast, any books or podcasts that you would suggest? I take it that you're like a big time voracious reader as well.
I love to read. I think that's as of the date, it's my only way of unwinding. I love getting just engrossed into a book, fiction, non-fiction, to do that. I don't listen to a lot of podcasts, to be honest. If I listen to something, sometimes it's audiobook. So I would say no podcast recommendations, sadly, because I don't listen to that. But I think there was this one that I tried, Philosophize This, which talks about some philosophy from sort of old days, which was fairly fascinating. And of course, you should look at Startup Operator. But I think in terms of in books, there was this book called The Making of the Atomic Bomb. I read it last year before the Oppenheimer movie came out, and it starts with the concept of the atom during the Greek time and even before that, and then how we learned the science and technology to build that. It weaves together technology, politics, geopolitics, history, individual circumstances, and then those descriptions of the bomb going off and what people saw. Beautiful book, I think. Teaches you everything from how humans behave and why humans do some things to technology and science. It's a great book. I love the Three Body Problem trilogy: Remembrance of Earth Past, Three Body Problem, Death's End, and Dark Forest. Some of the best sci-fi I've read. And I would say Ted Chiang has some great sci-fi books which gives ideas on how space colonization could be, and he takes these prompts on what a future optimistic or dystopian science fiction could bring us and talk about it. So I would say those are some of books top of mind.
Right. I mean, safe to say no one has recommended those books on the Startup Operator. I mean, our most recommended books are somewhere here, right? 0 to 1, a hard thing about hard things, and so on. But this is fascinating. I mean, I've been meaning to go down the rabbit hole on space. I mean, the atom bomb, especially after watching Oppenheimer. So, I mean, I will probably look that up. I mean, we won't keep you for long. I mean, you've been very gracious with your time. Thank you so much for sharing your insights.
The pleasure's all mine. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thank you.